the text is going to be clear. There's the text. Don't worry. This is just showing you. I found this actually, guys. Can we start?
Yeah. I've recorded.
This is a first shleimer for Damon. First of
all,
hold on.
Stop. Damon, give me permission to record. I need permission.
Okay, well, I can't do it until we stop the screen sharing.
Okay. Should I stop it?
Stop it for a second.
Okay.
Let's start. I'm coming now. I can hear you.
Okay.
Gavin, how are you, eh?
Hear you.
Okay, loud me. Okay, I'm recording now.
No, can I screen share?
Okay. Gavin, are you coming? Or... Okay, screen share.
I'm coming. I can hear you. I'm just round the corner. I'll be there in 2 minutes. Let's start.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so guys, this is the share is for the Eliyah of the Neshama of
Yehoshua ben Avraham, which is Jeffrey Kaplan, who passed away from COVID. And a referral for all the
Shlema for Shifra Simcha Bat Yeta and
all the
Adi Luri and
that's right.
And all Cholim of Klal Yisrael. Okay, so guys, just for something different for the next couple of sessions, maybe the next 2 sessions, or Matt, I don't know if we'll finish it. Yeah, I found something in this Birnbaum Siddur, which I actually got from a Bar Mitzvah, and I've been using it here. They don't really, it's out of print. It's so I found something relating to Talmud study and logic relating to Talmud. I haven't gone, I haven't read any, I just saw it, and I'm just going to read some of it here. It's in the morning service before Shachrit, before Baruch Sha'amar, and it's got here a Talmudic exposition of the scriptures.
Yes, it's an art scroll, you know that.
Is it an art scroll?
I'll tell you which page. It talks about a Gezerah Shava Hekesh. Yeah, I'll find it, but wow, thanks. I didn't know it was English.
I'll send you I'll send you the PDF. So basically, it's just giving like the logic behind arguments.
Guys, you know where it is? It's on page 49 on the Art Scroll Siddur. It's on page 49 on the Art Scroll Siddur at the bottom. Rav Yishmael said.
Yeah, Rav Ishmael said the same thing. The Torah is interpreted by means of 13 rules.
Yes.
So it's got the same thing in the Art Scroll.
Exactly. It goes from page 49 to page 50.
Go through them quickly. That'll be your learning for today, Kevin. It's nice.
Okay, so Rav Ishmael says the Torah is interpreted by means of 13 rules. Number 1, inference is drawn from a minor premise to a major one, or from a major premise to a minor one. From the similarity of words. Is that a Kal v'chomer?
Not necessarily. I'll explain.
What is that?
Rav Simcha told it to me, but just read it for now from a general, because we need to know this for the group.
From the similarity of words or phrases occurring in 2 passages, I think that's a Kal v'chomer.
No, that's a Gezerah
Shava. It is inferred that what is expressed in the one applies also to the other. So that's Gezerah Shava. A general principle as contained in 1 or 2 biblical laws is applicable to all related laws.
Okay, so that's an open Gezerah Shava. It's different.
Okay. When a generalization is followed by a specification, only what is specified applies.
Number 4 you're reading.
Yes.
Great.
When a generalization is followed by a specification, only what is specified applies.
Great.
Any term for that, or is it just okay? Well, it's
great. That's perfect.
That makes sense. Number 5, when a specification is followed by a generalization, all that is implied is all that is implied in the generalization applies. Okay. If a generalization is followed by a specification, and this in turn by a generalization, one must be guided by what the specification implies. So I think that's the overriding thing. What specification, specifics are what's important.
Yeah.
Okay, then it's got some sources there, but I'll send this to you guys and continue.
Just study 7, 8. Just go through there. Oh, you can't read it properly, eh?
Number 7.
Yeah. 7, 8, 9.
When, however, for the sake of clearness, a generalization necessarily requires a specification, or when a specification requires a generalization, rules 4 and 5 do not apply.
Okay, stop here. This is getting too hard. Damon will cover this as we go along.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. Okay, then the last point. Okay, I don't know why it didn't come out so clearly.
That's the rules of Klalim and Pratim. We'll go through that one day.
Should I send this to you guys?
Please. It's do you guys have a Art Scroll Siddur?
Yeah, I do. So Kevin, it's fine. We've got it on page 49. It's fine.
Okay, so it's
thank you so much.
Specific things, specifics are more important than generalizations.
You mean specifics trump generalizations?
Yeah.
We think, we're not sure. Damon will cover it as we go along because they have all different variations there and permutations. It's quite tricky.
Yeah, so I've got Shurim on the Klalim and Pratim rules and where they apply. But Kevin, thank you. This is something we need to go through as a group. Thank you very much.
But obviously, it's with look. This Siddur was written in the 1940s, so the English, it's not modern English. So
okay. Listen, you've been around a long time, Kevin. I'm surprised they invented the Gutenberg press.
Yeah.
You're so old. But you look good for your age, like a vampire that never ages. Rav Stephen, you there? Okay, we're going to start.
You want to be will never age? Go to the place where I work. The guys of 94 and 96 that are more alert than I am.
All right, guys.
Can't they join us, Yehoshua?
All right, guys, listen. We're on 41b2. Let's just proceed. Okay. All right, so we explained the brisa, which explains the phrase, and the owner of the ox is clean, naki. To forbid benefit from a condemned ox, somebody's mark is on. Okay, I'm just... All right, no problem.
You're mute, if it's me.
No, I put it on Stephen's mute, but Stephen, stay on the show. We'd love to have you, no problem. We love you.
Come in.
Okay. So, guys, listen, we firstly had this word naki, which means innocent. It says the owner of the ox is innocent or clean. It can be interpreted either way. Innocent from the fact that the owner of a tam ox isn't liable for kofir. I mean, he's not responsible for an ox that has been habitually tame and not crazy. And we say he's cleaned. What do we mean cleaned? He's cleaned out of the benefit. Somebody says they clean your home out. You've got no TV. You can't watch the TV. There's no benefit, which means he can't benefit from the animal that's stoned. So whether it's muad or tam, he's cleaned out of using both the benefit. We're not going to go through the whole shir yesterday, but this term naki is used in another interpretation as well, since it does have multiple meanings. Okay, so the rabbis taught in a brisa, the verse states, and the owner of the ox is absolved, meaning naki is cleaned. So it's also had the word absolved in it. Rav Eliezer says this teaches that the owner of a tam that kills is absolved from paying half kofir. Rabbi Akiva said to Rav Eliezer, is then a verse needed to teach that he does not pay half kofir? Why would not half kofir itself have been paid only from the body of the ox? And as we found regarding a tam that inflicts damage. And it is not possible to collect anything from a tam that kills, for it must be stoned and the carcass is forbidden for benefit. From where then would the heirs of the deceased collect half kofir? Let the owner of the ox say to them, bring the ox to court and it will pay you. This is obvious that there's no obligation to pay half kofir and no exposition is needed to teach this law. So Rabbi Akiva is saying to Rav Eliezer, look, why do we need the fact that the owner of the ox is absolved or is cleaned out? Very simply, absolved from the half kofir payment, because he's saying, look, take logic here. Where is muad paid from, guys?
Choice property.
Excellent. So, which means if you stone the animals, do you then owe payment from choice property? Yes. And kofir, where does it come from? Choice property. So he's saying so Rav Eliezer was saying, look, maybe you pay maybe there are opinions that say that you pay half kofir. We did learn, I think it was Rabbi Tarfon, we'll double check, that said you pay half kofir, I think. But it was one of the rabbis. So Rabbi Akiva is saying to Rabbi Eliezer, we can't be paying, because where do you pay tam from? You pay it from the body of the attacking animal, half payment damages. So things have to parallel, things have to mirror each other, which means if you are paying for damages from the body of the attacking ox, where else would you pay kofir from? It's not from choice property. You paid from the body of the damaging animal. There's only one problem here, is that, well, if the animal is stoned, there's a bigger problem that I've just thought of now. How do you pay damages from the animal that is stoned to the heirs? That's a problem. We haven't dealt with that yet. If the animal is going to be stoned, how do you get hanoah, benefit from it? But certainly half kofir you can't get from the animal that attacked. Does that make sense? Because it works in terms of tam, it mirrors. So kofir is paid from choice property, just like an ox owner that's muad. If you would say that there is an opinion that you pay half kofir, how are you going to pay it? The animal's stoned. If you're paying it like normal damages from the body of the stoned animal, we don't even pay, how would we pay normal damages on an animal that's stoned? We can't get benefit. So Rabbi Akiva is saying it's obvious to Rabbi Eliezer that you don't pay the half kofir, because where would the heirs collect it from? The animal is stoned. Make sense? Okay, so what do you think Rabbi Eliezer says to this? Just give me 1 second. Guys, what do you think Rabbi Eliezer says to this? Whoosh. Okay, so I'll put you out of your misery. He said, look, actually, I'm a little offended you should say it like that. He said, am I dust in your eyes? Meaning, do you think so little of me that you assume that my exposition refers to this ox that is liable for death? So what do you think it's saying to him? He said, do you think so little of me that I would state the obvious? Since half kofir is paid exactly like your damages for tam, the family doesn't seem to get the half kofir. I don't even know if they get the half damages. I don't know where they get their payment from, because the ox is not for benefit. So that's obvious. Why would you say that I'm explaining this verse to explain the obvious? I know the pasuk says the obvious by mere virtue of logic. I don't need a pasuk for that. So Rabbi Eliezer says, listen, I'm proposing different cases here in which such a thing could occur. First thing is, he said to him, look, my exposition is applicable only where the fact that the ox killed a person was established through the word of a single witness or through the word of the owner of the ox. In other words, its guilt is known to us only by the testimony of one witness or the admission of its owner. While such testimony is sufficient to assess the monetary payment of kofir, it doesn't suffice to execute the ox. In such a case where the ox can be sold and the proceeds used to pay kofir, my exposition is necessary to teach that the owner is absolved from half kofir. So what he's saying is, look, there's certain cases that we cannot stone the ox. When you stone a person, how many witnesses do you need? Two. So he's saying when you stone the property of a Jew, you need two witnesses. It follows. It's exactly the same sort of pattern. Now, so therefore we can't stone the ox, but there's enough to have witnesses valid, one witness valid in the testimony that witnessed such a thing, that allows us to say that such an incident did occur, but not enough to give a death penalty to the ox. So therefore we can extract it from the body of the attacking ox, because that ox is not put to death. The same thing about the testimony of the owner. Now, why do you think the testimony of the owner would absolve the fact that the ox isn't put to death? Guys, did you do chazorah?
Yeah, but I'm trying to think on this.
Would the owner, and I went over it, but I don't remember everything. Would the owner testify on the whereabouts where the ox was at the time? Is that what you're saying?
No, but Art, did you went through the stuff a few times. What's the answer? Why doesn't the owner pay? You gone mute. After you mute.
No, I'm unmuting it. Why doesn't the owner of the ox? I'm trying to think now. Hold on. Why does the owner of the ox pay?
Why doesn't he pay what? Coffee. You're talking about coffee.
Look, we're saying that Rav Eliezer says to Rabbi Akiva, it's obvious from logic in a normal case the animal is put to death. It's obvious you don't need a biblical verse. I'm not saying that the owner is absolved that you need the biblical verse for the obvious. Do you think so little of me? He's saying there are cases where we wouldn't put the animal to death. And therefore, since we don't put the animal to death and you're paying the half kofar from the attacking animal, because all time damages are paid from the attacking animal, including half kofar, in a case, we know already where there's one witness, it's not enough to put the ox to death. Because just like you need 2 witnesses to stone a person, so you need 2 witnesses to stone the property of a Jew. It has to follow certain protocols. So there we know. But also, if the owner testifies that his ox killed a person, why don't we pay half kofar in the case of a tam ox when the owner himself testifies? What's the reason?
We'll need a second witness.
Because he
hang on. Gavin, firstly, I think that answer is genius. It's not the answer, but I personally think that answer is absolute genius.
I didn't hear that. Say that again, Gavin.
I said that you need a second witness. He's not enough.
Yeah. So there's by the way, the defendant cannot be the witness. Rav Simcha Steinhauer taught us that, but your logic is brilliant.
A conflict of interest.
It's a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
So it doesn't apply, but I think your logic, at least your brain's working.
Well, that's why I thought there would be a second witness, because otherwise you can't take his testimony. If there's a second witness, I thought probably you could.
Okay, so bottom line, the reason being is that some view the kofar payment. There was an argument in the 15th daf where some said that it actually resembles a guys, can you hang on a sec? The cat's just decombobulated everything. Oh my gosh. Cranberry, will you go away? Sorry, guys. So what I was going to say is, if kofar is seen as compensation, you don't have a problem. If it's seen as a knas, why would it be seen as a knas, a penalty? Well, for one reason, is the tam is seen as a penalty. You were negligent. So some of the rabbis obligate you in a tam payment because it's a penalty to make you wake up. The same with the kofar payment. Is that, remember we said that some of the rabbis say it's a penalty, knas, and some say it's a mammon, compensation. So therefore, those that say it's a penalty, if you admit it in court, before you trouble the court, if you go and volunteer that information, you don't have to pay that half kofar. Well, then the question would arise, then how the heck do you pay a full kofar? Because if it's a penalty, do you just get off it? Do you get what I'm saying? But it seems to be dealt with as a penalty because it's not necessarily obligated with the tam. But with the muad, it is obligated. Because it's known as a penalty with the tam because you don't really owe it. You've done nothing wrong. It's only you owe the full compensation muad because your animal was warned and you didn't look after a fellow Jew's property. And it allowed him to damage his property. On that basis, half kofar would be seen as the same as a tam payment, which means it's a penalty. According to some opinions, you wouldn't have to pay it if you got to the court before their claim. All right. So that's the two opinions of Rav Eliezer. Now we're just going to the next part because it says the Gemara challenges one of Rav Eliezer's examples. But kofar cannot be assessed on the basis of such testimony either. Because according to the testimony of the owner, we know that the ox killed a person It is in the case of someone who admits to an act punishable by a fine, and a fine cannot be assessed on the basis of one's own admission. So the Gemara answers, Rav Eliezer maintains that kofar is an atonement payment. Hence, I might think that we obligate the owner of a tam to pay half kofar even on the basis of his own admission so that he can attain atonement. It was therefore necessary for the Torah to teach that he doesn't pay. So Rav Eliezer is actually not the one that feels it's a penalty. And the reason being is what, guys? Is he's saying that we know that this biblical verse and the owner is absolved is coming to say you don't pay half kofar in two incidents where you generally should. The first incident is when there's one witness, therefore you can pay half kofar because the animal is not stoned and you pay from the body of the attacking animal. And therefore, that verse that says the ox of the owner is absolved means he doesn't have to pay the half kofar. That's why we need a biblical verse. That's his answer to Rabbi Akiva in cases where you don't necessarily kill the tam ox. That's obvious. Then his second one is saying, listen, I don't hold it as a knas. I don't hold it as a fine. I actually hold it as a mammon, which means it's an atonement payment even for the tam animal. And therefore, we need that biblical verse to say that even though you could pay it by the owner's own admission. Why do we believe the owner? Because if the owner, Gavin, let me just tell you something. The owner generally doesn't want to pay money. Is that correct or is that not correct? Gavin?
That's correct.
100%.
Yes, because nobody wants to pay money. So witnesses are there generally to force a person to pay money against their will by evidence if they're trying to hide the evidence. But if a person comes to the court and says, I've done wrong, I have to pay, then generally we believe such a person simply because nobody wants to pay money. So he says, listen, it's an atonement payment. This guy feels terrible. And therefore, I don't hold it's a knas, because how does it atone if he gets off the hook, even for a tam and half kofar payment? So I hold it's an atonement payment, which means it's compensation to the family. And therefore, I would have to pay if we don't stone the animal on the basis that the owner is either, you could say, as Gavin's logic, it's one witness, or we don't believe that the owner itself would be enough as one person to actually convict the animal to death. You know what I'm saying, Gavin? To me, it makes sense what you're saying. So let's go with what you're saying. But he says then we specifically need a biblical verse to say that the ox's owner is absolved from kofar. Because when the animal is not stoned, we can pay the kofar from the attacking animal. If the animal is stoned, we won't be able to because there's nothing left of the animal. We can't get benefit. So he's just cited two examples that are not logical where the animal survives, where we need the biblical verse to say he still does not pay. That's what the biblical verse of the ox of the owner is absolved for. Does that make sense, guys? It's logic. It's obvious. Kev, does it make sense?
Just say it again.
Right, I'll give
I went over it, but very.
Let me give it to you.
I wasn't thorough as I've been recently.
Let me give it to you in one sentence. Rabbi Akiva is saying, I don't need a biblical verse. Its logic tells me that if we stone the tam ox, and just like your normal payments for tam that come from the body of the attacking animal, so too your half kofar would either. It doesn't come from choice property. You wouldn't pay half kofar because there's nothing left of the animal. It's stoned and you can't get benefit. So Rav Eliezer, why do you need this verse? The owner of the ox is absolved. Logic would dictate. He said, Rav Eliezer, do you think so little of me that I would state the obvious? I'm stating certain circumstances where you would still have the animal that's technically not stoned, and therefore you could pay the half kofar of the body of the attacking animal. Case number one, there's not two witnesses. Just as you need two witnesses to have a human being stoned in a death penalty case, so too when you're stoning the property of a fellow Jew, you would need two witnesses. And in the case of one witness, it's enough that their testimony is valid with regards to the death and kofar payment, but not with regards to killing an animal. You need two for the killing, but not for the testimony. So since the animal survives, you would think that you could pay half kofar from the attacking animal. And this biblical verse, the owner is absolved of is saying that there's no half coffee payment. Fine. Second example is when the owner himself admits to it, because Rav Eliezer said it's not a knas, a penalty, because those that hold that half coffee is a penalty, even though it's an atonement, then they wouldn't have to pay, because if the owner admitted it in court, he'd be off the hook. I'm saying it's a mammon, it's an atonement payment, it's compensation to the family, and he gets his atonement by compensating the family, so therefore he's not off the hook. So we need the special biblical verse, but we can't stone the animal because it's just the owner. It's like one witness in a way. So therefore, you would think you can technically pay a half coffee because we don't stone the animal. Somebody can't get their own animal stoned in that way, okay, because they're the owner. Apart from being one person, Kevin, your logic is sounder. So you're saying you could think that because it's seen as a mammon and not knas, he's not off the hook if he admits to it, because it's a compensation. It's not a penalty by his own admission that he gets off. Therefore, since he owes it, we would think the owner could owe half coffee. And this biblical verse, the owner of the ox is absolved, is teaching we don't pay half coffee in this case. Great. Those are two examples. I'm going to give you two more, guys. Okay. Just give me a sec. So the Gemara, Rav Eliezer maintains that okay. So a second brisa records a different response by Rav Eliezer. It was taught in another brisa. Guys, listen carefully. This is genius. Rav Eliezer said to Rabbi Akiva, am I thus in your eyes that you assume that my exposition refers to this ox, which is liable for death? My exposition refers only to where the ox intended to kill an animal and instead killed a person, or where it intended to kill an idolatrous Egyptian and instead killed a Jew, or where it intended to kill non-viable babies and instead killed a viable person. In all of these cases, the ox is not sentenced to death, and it's possible to collect coffee from the ox itself. Now, why is this? I'll tell you why. Because, guys, if somebody's getting the death penalty, there's certain opinions. So we learned this in Sanhedrin, Gavin. There's opinion of Rav Yehuda and the rabbis, etc. Now, if you intended to kill somebody, but you missed and you killed somebody else, okay? So, for example, there are two guys in a bar fight that they're going to attack each other. Now, what do you think they're going there to? Hug each other. They want to damage each other, maybe even kill each other. But if accidentally one of the guys was trying to swing at a fellow guy in the bar and hooked his wife in the jaw, and she ended up being tickets and going to the next world, he doesn't, according to some rabbinic opinions, he doesn't get the death penalty offense because his intention wasn't to kill her. Where does he go? To the city of refuge. Okay, there's some opinions that he does get the death penalty offense. There were cases in Sanhedrin where, like the stone that we learned, that he intended to throw it and it clipped his victim. But in other words, intent is a big part of things. That if you don't intend to kill a person, or maybe you intended to kill, say an Egyptian, say you had some Arab guy that was assaulting a Jew, and you picked up a rock and you meant to kill that Egyptian guy, okay? And you missed and you killed the Jew. Then do you think you get the death penalty according to the Jewish court?
No, because intent plays a role with human beings.
Correct. So too with animals, it's saying. It's saying if you're giving a Jewish, not a Jewish ox, an ox owned by a Jewish person, the death penalty, the same rules apply to a human, is that your intent has to be focused. In other words, if the animal quite clearly was intending for a different victim or a different outcome and managed to hit the wrong person, we don't stone the ox. But you still would technically, in that case, pay half coffee because people witnesses a person dying. So a Jew died, but maybe this ox was going for an Egyptian. Does that make sense? And the Egyptian got out of the way and the horn hit a Jewish person and a Jewish person died. So we don't put the ox to death because his intention was to ventilate the Egyptian. And
how do we know? Sorry to interrupt. 1 second. How do we know what an animal's intention is? It's impossible.
Okay, so two things, Gavin, to answer your question. I thought about it because I thought it was a good question, is number one, is that there are many things that we could ask in Sanhedrin. How does it play out in practicality as opposed to theoretical case? Because we learn these Gemaras not always as cases that happened in its pristine condition, but what would be the result if it happened in that condition? Okay, that's number one. So the thing of it is also, so say, for example, a Jew was sitting by the market eating an apple, and this Egyptian was tormenting it. Maybe it wanted to have its way with the ox. Who knows? Maybe it was a Australian with a sheep. Who knows? But the thing of it is this animal turned around to gore this person, and this person got out of the way, and the person eating the apple, well, it was his last apple. But you could see quite clearly his intent and his irritation was at the Egyptian specifically. And therefore, since that's the case, we can see that it intent in that particular case. Does that make sense? Or maybe a guy was coming up to the ox like that and pushing it and spitting at it, or a kid, and the kid got out the way, and the mother behind was by the pram, and the ox clipped the mother. So we're saying in a case where you can visually represent. So in two of those cases, it mentioned instead of an Egyptian, it was meaning to kill an Egyptian, it killed a Jew. It was meaning to kill a non-viable baby or a treifa or somebody that's technically considered dead, and it kills somebody that's living and functional. And in that particular case, intent would occur where we could only stone a person, we could only kill a fellow Jew if his intent was to kill that person. Okay? So therefore, the property of an ox owned by a Jew. So we're saying in that case, we cannot stone the ox, and therefore there's a biblical verse that states that the owner of the ox is absolved, because technically you could pay half kofar then, Kevin. Why? A Jewish person is dead, okay, even though the ox didn't intend to kill it, and we don't stone the animal because its intent wasn't to kill that person, but there is a Jewish person that died. So therefore we can't stone that ox that was meant to be dead, and therefore the half kofar is paid from the it's a half kofar because it's a tum incident and is paid from the body of the attacking ox, just like other tum payments. And we haven't stoned the ox, so there's something to pay from. Since there's something to pay from in that particular case, we need this verse, the owner of the ox is absolved, to teach that we still, even in those cases where the body of the ox would remain, we still don't pay half kofar in the case of a tum. That's what Rav Eliezer is saying. Does that make sense, guys?
No.
Let's just fly through this. It's very logical. All right. So, in all these cases, the ox is not sentenced to death, and thus possible to collect kofar from the ox itself. Hence the necessity for my exposition of the verse, and the owner of the ox is absolved. The Gemara inquires, which response did Rav Eliezer say to Rabbi Akiva first? The one contained in the first brisa, in other words, there was a single witness or the owner himself, or the one contained in the second, where the exposition refers to where the ox intended to kill an animal and instead killed a person, or when it intended to kill an idolatrous Egyptian and instead killed a Jew, or where it intended to kill non-viable babies and instead killed a viable person. Okay? So, Gavin, my favorite one there is actually when it intended to kill an animal because the two were charging at each other and a person walked across the road and got squished. That's the most logical one where you could prove. Does that make sense? Guy wasn't looking. So, based on that, it said, which did Rav Eliezer say to Rabbi Akiva first? So there are two views. Rav Kahana said in the name of Rava, he initially told Rabbi Akiva the case of intent, meaning the answer contained in the second brisa. Rav Tavi Meir said in the name of Rava, he initially told Rabbi Akiva the case of an ox that killed according to the testimony of the owner or of one witness. So guys, we've got a question. Which response did Rav Eliezer say to Rabbi Akiva first? The one containing the fact that there was one witness or one owner, or the owner, or the fact that the animal's intention was to kill somebody else, either another animal or a non-viable person or an Egyptian, etc., and instead killed this Jew. Which exposition came first? Rav Kahana said in the name of Rava that he initially told Rabbi Akiva that the case of intent. But Rav Tavi May said in the name of Rabbi initially told Rabbi Akiva the case of an ox that killed according to the testimony of the owner or of one witness. So the Gemara discusses two views. According to Rav Kahana said in the name of Rabbi, who said that Rav Eliezer initially told Rabbi Akiva the case in which the ox intended to kill someone else, and then later offered a different, less satisfying example. So why is it less satisfying, guys, just as a matter of interest? Can you think of why?
What's the example? Give us an example.
No, I'm saying the example was more satisfying of intent to kill, where the animal, for example, intended to kill an animal and ended up killing a Jew, for example, where the intention was a much better example than the one witness story or the owner itself. Why was it a better, more viable option?
The chances of you getting that three witnesses and the animal, three people dying at the same time. We're talking about that one, right?
No, that's a different case. All right, so bottom line is it seems that Rabbi Akiva never objected to the opinion when he gave the strong opinion of the animal's intent. In other words, if we're saying a Jew intends to kill an animal and killed another Jew because that animal ducked out of the way when he shot a gun towards the animal and there was some Jew behind lying in the bushes eating a sandwich to enjoy a nice picnic, in that particular case, it doesn't even have an objection from Rabbi Akiva. If you want to have a testimony of one witness, for example, the person is in fact guilty. You just don't have enough witnesses to testify against them, that's all. So the much stronger case is one of intent. So he's saying, well, why would he mention the weaker case first, or why would he mention the stronger case? Again, the weaker one was one witness or the owner. The stronger case is intent. Because actually then...
But obviously intent with two witnesses, obviously.
Intent with two witnesses, but it's stronger because that would get you even off the hook with two witnesses. It's a much stronger example. So they're saying, well, which one did he say first? And obviously, Rav Kahana said he used the stronger example, said in the name of Rav, he used the stronger example first. And Rav Tavi May said in the name of Rav, he used the weak example. So he's saying, well, how did they explain it? Firstly, why would you use the weaker one first? And why would you use the stronger one first? Okay. So, according to the one who said that you'd use the stronger argument first, is this can be illustrated with the analogy of a trapper, a fisherman, who fishes fish from a sea. Okay? So, it's described basically like this. When he finds large fish in his net, he takes them. And if afterwards he finds small fish, he takes them also. Similarly, although Rav Eliezer had already convincingly demonstrated the need for his exposition, he nevertheless noted other circumstances in which his exposition applies. Although his argument that his exposition is necessary in these cases is not as compelling. So one of the reasons that the Gemara actually put in the notes why it says such a thing is because when you're giving over Torah, it's a good idea. It says to glorify the Torah, its scholars are want to expand and expound upon it as much as possible, even when there's no practical necessity. That's according to Ravad. So it's saying it's good for the mind and good for a Torah brain to be able to see all the cases when it's applied, even if it's not necessary. So that's that reason. Now, according to Rav Tavio May, who said in the name of Rava, Rav Eliezer initially told Rabbi Akiva the more questionable case of the ox killing according to the owner or a single witness, and this can be illustrated with the analogy of a trapper who fishes fish from the sea. So they're both using the same analogy. But he says when he first finds small fish in his nets, he takes them because he hasn't got anything better. But when afterwards he finds larger fish in his net, he throws the smaller ones back in the ocean because he's only got a smallish container. And therefore he has to make a choice. He doesn't want something thin and bony. He'd rather have a more substantial fish for his family because now he has a choice. So similarly, Rav Eliezer initially asserted that his exposition applies in the case of an ox that killed according to a single witness or the owner's admission. And then when he thought of a better example, he realized that his exposition could apply in other less debatable circumstances. He issued a second rejoinder. Does that make sense? Because Rav Eliezer was convinced that the phrase must be expounded to absolve the owner from half kofeh. Just hang on a second. Okay, so all right, guys. I think we actually done. We're done. We only needed 45 minutes, but we've done. We've finished the 41st daf.
Ah, well done.
We actually finished it, guys.
Damon, how's it? Just one quick comment.
Yeah.
When the ox intended to kill the Egyptian or an idolater, they had a death sentence decreed on them.
No.
So didn't.
No.
Well, they weren't. I saw something. I know
what Kevin saw. What you saw was as follows. There was a commentary that, idolatry is a death sentence. It's one of the 7 Noahide laws. He's right. Kevin's completely correct. At which they're universal laws. A non-Jewish person is not allowed to kill and is not allowed to commit adultery. So it's a death penalty offense at the hands of heaven, meaning that nobody's going to exactly cry if somebody dies and they really upset Hashem. Nobody's going to cry for his death or try and seek justice for a rotten individual dying. There's no Jewish court that's going to put even a Jewish owned animal to death for killing an idolater. An idolater is a waste of oxygen.